this is Block 7, The Greatest Generation, Section 3, War without the United States, and the section Destroyers for Bases. All right, before we get into Destroyers for Bases, we have to talk a little bit about the Battle of the Atlantic. And here we have a map of the Battle of the Atlantic, which I will zoom in. Just like in World War I, Great Britain is dependent upon its sea lanes to feed itself. It is dependent on food from the United States, supplies from the United States, supplies from Canada, supplies from its empire, and all of this food, supplies, material, etc., have to somehow make it into the home islands, into England and itself. So what the Germans did with their submarines is they pretty much set up submarine pickets around Great Britain and sent submarines out into the Atlantic Ocean to prey on this merchant shipping. Because just like in World War I, Germany's plan is to starve Great Britain out. The ships that are used to defend the merchant ships are not these enormous battleships that are not aircraft carriers. These merchant ships are defended by what are known as destroyers. And here is a World War II era destroyer, number 857. I don't know the name of this particular ship, but you can see she is not as big as a battleship is. She carries relatively small weapons. She's very fast, can travel upwards of 30-35 miles per hour. Very fast for a World War II era ship. And they are armed, and the way that they attack submarines is they are armed with what are known as depth charges, which you see right here. And what happens is you have a depth charge launcher on the stern of the ship, on the back of the ship, and when there's a submarine in the area, these things get launched up into the air and then fall down, and they are set to explode at different depths in the hope that you will explode it at the same depth level as the submarine happens to be. Great Britain ran out of destroyers. They simply did not have enough of these ships in their navy anymore to protect all of the shipping that had to be protected in order so they wouldn't starve to death. So Churchill pretty much goes begging to Roosevelt. And Churchill tells Roosevelt, Mr. President, we need these destroyers. That the United States had a bunch of old World War I era destroyers just kind of sitting around. And Roosevelt said, Mr. President, we need those destroyers. And Roosevelt, as much as he may have liked Churchill, was going to drive a very hard bargain in order for Churchill to get his destroyers. But Churchill was in no position to really debate much. He needed those destroyers, whatever the cost that Roosevelt kind of chose to exert out of him. And the cost that Roosevelt demanded for 50 World War I era destroyers, and here's a picture of one of these 50 World War I. They're old destroyers, they're not top of the line, they are not up-to-date machines. They're 30 years old, but the British need was simply that great. And what Roosevelt demanded in exchange for the destroyers was a string of bases that the British would give the United States control over all of their Western Hemisphere naval bases, from Newfoundland to Bermuda, the Bahamas, Jamaica, and through, wow. I need one of those automatic PowerPoint thingamabobers. That the United States would take over all of these British bases in exchange for the destroyers. Churchill knew he needed the destroyers that badly. He couldn't quibble, he couldn't argue. So the deal was done. Was it legal? Roosevelt did not ask Congress. Yeah, you know, who knows? Roosevelt was unwilling to ask Congress. Congress was still very evenly divided between interventionists and isolationists. Roosevelt did not want to put the security of Great Britain up for a vote in the United States House and in the United States Senate. So Roosevelt just ignored Congress and went and did it on his own. Now, many critics charge Roosevelt with kind of beginning this concept of what came to be called the Imperial Presidency. That the president just does what he wants to do, regardless of what Congress thinks about it. Destroyers for bases was a clear violation of neutral principles. The United States was a neutral country in 1940, and neutral countries, you know, can't go around giving weapons to countries who are fighters, giving them away. They were not sold, they were simply traded. And it's not like the British had to stop using the bases. They didn't. So this was a violation of neutral obligations. But the American people did not complain too much. And what that told Roosevelt was that his population was slowly but surely moving in the direction of intervention. Destroyers for bases has a lot of important things to it. One, it keeps those sea lanes open, or helps to keep the sea lanes open as much as possible. It helps the British out in a terrible need that they have. It starts this concept of the president ignoring Congress when he doesn't feel like talking to Congress, and it shows that the American people through 1940 are becoming more pro-Britain and pro-intervention in their outlook than they had been previously.